Hey guys, what's happening? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel as always. And today we are once again listening to a podcast excerpt from a podcast that I was on just last night. I was a guest on the podcast on Andre's Restarts channel, which is a really good YouTube channel that I just discovered only a couple of months ago. Love the content and the videos and the discussions that he's making, and he reached out to me and asked me to be a guest on the podcast. And with so much Nintendo news and especially Metroid news happening over the past couple of weeks, it was a great time to honestly be on that podcast. We had a blast. I would love to get some attention over to Andres' channel, maybe some of my fans if you guys discover his and you like what he's doing. I hope you check out the rest of his videos and his content, and of course, the full podcast from what I'm featuring today. We talk a ton of Metroid stuff on this, you guys. We cover a lot of other Nintendo stuff, but if you like hearing me talk about Metroid, him and I really go deep into the topic, so whatever it is you're looking for, Paper Mario, Pikmin, Metroid, Zelda, we talk about all of that stuff. So with that being said, here is a quick excerpt from that podcast where we discuss Breath of the Wild 2 for quite a bit. I hope that you enjoy this clip. I hope that you check out the rest of the full podcast and his channel. And with that being said, enjoy.
But he also brought up Breath of the Wild too, so I'm curious on your perspective on this. So before the whole pandemic situation, my perspective was that Breath of the Wild 2 would likely be a holiday this year release for the holidays, because we had an E3 reveal for it using the same engine as Breath of the Wild, which cuts down development a fair bit. We got an interview from Anuma saying they were returning to Hyrule. So like for all these different reasons, you got to think that they're pretty far along, and a lot of Zelda games usually stories develop late into development, and that was to me a story trailer we saw last year. So my perspective was they were really far along, and I felt like a year and a half afterwards would probably be a good time to release Breath of the Wild 2. So that's what I thought, but now I'm not that confident anymore because, well, we don't even know what's happening past July, and 5 days ago we didn't know what was happening past May,
We didn't even know that.
Yeah. So I feel like at this point, any predictions I had should just be completely thrown out the window because we don't know what's going to happen. But your personal perspective, what do you think what was going to happen and what is maybe going to happen now?
Well, pretty much since it was revealed, I kind of was thinking that the game was 2021. That's sort of been my target date, which isn't obviously exciting for people because as soon as we saw it, we wanted it like ASAP.
Right.
So, holiday 2020, holiday this year has always been more exciting, and I've always seen it as a possibility. But I really have been focused on that 2021 date. It just felt like, yes, we know they're farther along in that game than something like a Metroid Prime, for example, because they're building it off of a game that already existed. They confirmed that it was born out of DLC for Breath of the Wild. Right. So they already had some probably story concepts and gameplay tweaks like already in place and ideas using the same engine, only slightly better. It just makes sense for them to be pretty close to releasing it, but I just didn't see it as a 2020 game. But yeah, I'm in a weird kind of almost opposite boat as you, because now the pandemic comes along, and for all intents and purposes, I think I or anyone should expect the game to be delayed further into like a 2021. But as time has gone on, even through the pandemic, I have been warming up to the idea of it actually being a holiday 2020 title. And I don't really know why, other than the longer we've gone on without understanding what they're doing in the rest of 2020, the more I've tried to figure out what could they possibly be doing. I mean, Paper Mario was never on my radar, to be fair. But it's like, what else could they do? And it's like, well, they have this humongous Zelda game that is going to be a massive hit. And we know they didn't start it from scratch. They're building it off of what the prior game was. So maybe 2020 makes sense. Like it started to kind of work in my brain. Does the pandemic change the situation? It's tough to say because it sure could be changing it. But even that would only be a change if they were originally planning to put it in 2020. So I don't know. I think if I was still, let's pretend I was going to go to Vegas and put money on this. I think I would still put money on 2021. But I'm not totally shutting 2020 out. I mean, I will say though, we're every day is like getting closer and closer to the time where they would need to reveal that game because it's so big.
If we go by history, they should have revealed it months ago what was going to be the holiday lineup.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
honestly, if you go by history, it would have been like 3 years ago as far as Zelda's, because
Yeah.
it was like 3 years for Breath of the Wild.
Right.
But
Yeah.
you're right. You're definitely right. There's another cog in this wheel though, which is, and I don't know if this would affect Nintendo's decision, but now we know this holiday has 2 new next generation consoles coming out.
Yes.
So
Right.
that could more convince Nintendo to release Breath of the Wild this year, or more convince them to delay it. It could go either way.
So I have another idea related to this. I brought it up in a video I published earlier this week. So my take on the whole pandemic situation, a couple different things. One, so we got that Q&A, right? And we got some translations, and one thing, I don't know if I have it. Actually, I do have an image of it here. Nope, apparently I don't know how to spell Twitter and search for it on my computer. Here we go. All right, so for those watching the podcast, you'll see this come up. But basically, I took this tweet from Rotford Sefazan, and I highlighted one part that I found to be interesting. And basically, I'll just read it out and I'll tell you the highlighted part. He mentions there are other titles they plan to release this year, in addition to those already announced. However, it may be difficult to finish development during the current situation as employees are working from home. But this is the highlighted part. Their forecast assumes they will release as planned. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but to me, that seems like they're preparing investors to expect some potential delays, but it's not really set in stone yet. At this point, they're still optimistic that their initial plan for 2020 is going to carry out for the most part. That was what I sort of interpreted from that.
Yeah, it could be that. It could also be them trying to calm investors' fears too. You know, they might have wanted to sneak that in. Because the whole statement they were obviously making to those investors is, yeah, things are really hard. People are working from home. There's a pandemic, so games are fluctuating. But don't worry, because we're still projected, so it's still okay.
Yeah,
calm down. Don't sell anything.
That makes sense. It could just be that they're just trying to temper fears and just keep everyone like, stay put. Don't worry. Just stay tuned. We'll figure it out. And that could totally be the case. I mean, I think either way, no matter how you look at it, nothing is really set in stone right now.
It's not.
But my take is, if Breath of the Wild 2 was planned for a holiday 2020 release, which to me makes sense. It would make sense because, as you mentioned, there's the next generation systems coming out, and even though Nintendo's not a direct competitor, you're still competing for the spotlight. People have to spend their money somewhere. It makes sense that, hey, you're gonna want to have something out there that people are gonna want to spend their money on, because if not, people are gonna spend their money elsewhere. So something like a Breath of the Wild 2 to me would be ideal, because I think it could even be a better game than Breath of the Wild, because Breath of the Wild was Nintendo's first foray with Zelda into the open world format. I think with their second take on it, they could perfect that formula. So I think they have a huge opportunity to really hit it out of the park with Breath of the Wild 2, even though Breath of the Wild already hit it out of the park and then some. I think they could do even more with Breath of the Wild 2. So I think in terms of that spotlight potential, I think Breath of the Wild 2 would be the kind of game that would make sense in terms of competing with next gen, right? But it's still, they may just push it off. It may not really matter. Technically, the 35th anniversary for Zelda's next year. Maybe they'll do something special for that, and I get all that. But you remember Mario Odyssey? I don't know if you remember, but when we go back to January 2017, they had a report that Mario Odyssey was virtually done, and they were just polishing things up. The game came out October that year, so it was basically done for over half a year. So, and the thing is, it was planned. Nintendo, like the Wii U sort of, it was dead for a while. Nintendo sort of spent their time building up for the Switch launch, so they had things planned. I wonder if, similar to that, Nintendo has plans to compete with next gen, and they want to have a big game there. And maybe it won't be Breath of the Wild 2. There's a whole bunch of other options, right? Maybe it is a Secret Retro Studios game, for example, or maybe it's just a Mario remasters. But I have to think that maybe they've been done. They have something they've been done with for a while, and they have that set for release then. If Breath of the Wild 2 isn't a Mario Odyssey situation where it's been virtually done for most of the year, even if there is a pandemic, I mean, obviously there is, but that whole switch, that transition to mobile development, remote development, that might lead to delays. But if they're virtually done half a year in advance, they might still be able to hit their projected launch for that, if that was planned for the holidays. if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
like,
And all of this is
yeah,
speculatory, obviously, but
it's all we can do, especially
Yeah.
in 2020, man. That's like all we can do
Yeah.
with Nintendo is we're speculating and guessing. And yeah, so I mean, it's a good point. They might be sitting on an almost complete version of that game. It doesn't feel like that's the case,
Mhm.
but it is possible. And you bring up a good point with Odyssey, because, you know, being done with Odyssey so early, but not releasing it until October of that year was just all about strategy. It's
Right.
like, where can we strategically place this game to be most effective for our new console that, you know, for all they know, wasn't even going to be a hit. We saw that game before the Switch came out. People were really excited for the Switch, but, you know, it could have gone either way by the time it came out. Luckily, it did nothing but just go vertical with its sales and its popularity. But it could have plateaued, it could have gone up and down, and who knows what. So they were like, when can we, if we're going to need to lift up a potentially struggling console 6-7 months after it's out, when can we put that game out? And with Breath of the Wild 2, maybe they would do a similar situation. When I think about the consoles coming out and them sitting on a complete Breath of the Wild 2 and wanting to release it as competition, I think that as far as games go, it's the number one thing that they could release to kind of take mind share away from this, you know, week or this month when 2 next-gen consoles launch. It's like, well, you get a PlayStation 5, you get an Xbox Series X, or you get this mammoth Zelda sequel humongous release.
Yeah.
And so Nintendo, they get to keep themselves in the conversation throughout that period. I think that's mostly the reason you do it. But that's also, here's the reasons you don't do it, is because that's a time when people are battling and competing for everyone's gaming dollar. And in a normal November, it's just a bunch of video games everyone's putting out. So people can buy multiple video games. But if you're putting out 2 $500 next-gen consoles, people are going to be like, well, do I spend $600 on my PS5 in a game? Or do I buy Breath of the Wild 2? Or maybe I can only buy a console and a game. I'm not going to buy a PS5, but then buy Zelda and then not have a game for my PS5 or Xbox or whatever. So the battle for the dollar becomes much tighter in that period, right? And so that's why I was like, you know, it could convince them to do it to keep them in the conversation, or convince them to delay to 2021 to just make sure Breath of the Wild 2 has more of a free period to launch in its own bubble where it's the star, right?
And I totally understand what you're saying. Like, it could kind of go either way. And actually, to that idea, I believe during the Q&A, Nintendo mentioned how there's, I don't want to say it's a fear, but there's a possibility that because a lot of people are unemployed right now, and there's a pandemic, people, you know, right now sales are good because people haven't been out of work for that long yet. But by the holidays, how are things going to be? Could that lead to people not spending that much money once people have been unemployed for 4 or 5, 6 months? Like, what if we're in a situation where holiday sales are just at an all-time low? So then it just kind of goes more to your point, like, why throw Zelda out there when it's probably not going to sell that much anyway because of the economic situation, but also because of the competition? Why not just wait till March or something, or sometime later where it'll be a healthy economic environment, and then just allow that to thrive then?
100%. Not to mention, you obviously, I'm sure you know, like, there is the concern that this thing gets a little bit worse coming out of the summer, right? So going into that fall holiday time,
totally possible.
I hope not. It's weird. My fiance and I talked about that literally this morning. We had a whole conversation about that, and like, do you think it's going to happen? What if it does? What if it doesn't? Because it's just such a crazy time. And I think you brought up March. I was actually going to bring up the same thing, because we can't forget that delaying it 4 months from like a theoretical November to a March becomes a cool way for them to just put it out at Breath of the Wild anniversary time.
It could be an Animal Crossing situation.
With. They can clearly sell huge sales of great games in March with Breath of the Wild and with Animal Crossing this year. So, I mean, they probably don't have to feel so restricted to that November next-gen console release time.
Right.
So,
and then Nintendo's also most of their titles are evergreen titles, so once they get out there, it's just kind of going to continue to sell regardless. And I guess also with Breath of the Wild itself is still selling. So maybe you don't even need a Breath of the Wild 2 necessarily, because a lot of people are buying Breath of the Wild. So waiting a little bit more time, kind of, the people who have bought the initial Breath of the Wild, that extra wait makes even more people who got the initial one more likely to get the sequel, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But then what happens is the fact that so many people are really kind of getting tired of waiting for games from Nintendo.
And
You know,
actually,
I mean,
I have a few friends who have canceled their pre-orders for Metroid Prime 4 just because there's
no
been
way.
no information on. Like, I have friends that are just like, they just don't even believe it's gonna happen. And I'm like,
it's
oh, don't
happening.
worry, it's gonna happen.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But the point is though, like, it's just, yeah, sometimes the consumer can kind of just get fed up with waiting sometimes.
Just get tired. Yeah.
Which
I mean, that's okay though.
Go on.
Go ahead.
No.
Well, I was going to say that that's okay because even if people say, "Well, I'm done believing in Metroid Prime 4. I'm done believing in Breath of the Wild 2 or Pikmin 4 or whatever," and they cancel pre-orders, at some point those games pop back up. We see the trailers, we get the release dates, everyone gets hyped again, and so people are going to reinvest. They're going to pre-order.
So it's not like the sales actually lost necessarily. It's just
exactly.
Yeah.
Nintendo get them back. That's what Nintendo does. They get everybody back.
Yeah,
So.
I totally agree. And I guess the other point I wanted to bring up was that even if we don't get Breath of the Wild 2 this year, which is becoming increasingly more of a safe bet, that doesn't mean they can't give us a trailer. That doesn't mean we can't get an update on it this year. And that alone to me will be very simply the experience of getting these reveals is kind of part of being a Nintendo fan. Like, it's not just, yes, obviously playing the game is like that core piece, but hearing about these games, seeing these games, and talking about them, I feel like is also like an integral part to the experience. So just getting a teaser trailer at some point this year, I think, will be kind of magical for a lot of us.
Yeah, that fits into the whole Nintendo being a little bit more forthcoming and transparent with info. I mean, and I know you said you watch a lot of my content, and I've talked about that several times over the past probably 2 months. It's been a huge focus of a lot of my conversations. Is because I'm patient. I'm not somebody who's been angry at Nintendo for being slow or quiet or waiting for directs. Like, it's so clear that everybody is so impacted by what's happening, and so. As I've said, you've heard me probably say this in my videos, like, I am happy to afford Nintendo or any company as much time as they need to do whatever they need to do for their business. Like, keep people safe, don't force games out by risking people's lives, like, whatever. But at the same time, Nintendo being one of the more quiet companies in the industry right now compared to other companies, at least recently, has been a little bit frustrating because I don't think it would be crazy for Nintendo to translate or relay some of their business stuff even to us, the consumer and the gamer and the content creator. And so within that is your point about a trailer for Breath of the Wild. So why couldn't they just say, hey, it's just time for an update on this game we showed you last year. Things are slow, things are crazy, release dates are up in the air. But we're still working on this game.
At least
keeps the you're right. Keeps the conversation. So I'm with you there. I think that it would be, and they might do it. I don't think that it's impossible for them to do it. It would just be nice of them to do it.
So I'll say that we're talking about 2021 now as maybe being that target date for Breath of the Wild, but when, like, we mentioned March. Like, if it's March, I think like Nintendo pretty much has to talk about it before then. I mean, there's some precedent not to, like, look at Paper Mario, for example, but Paper Mario is not on the same scale as Zelda. But if it's later in the year, like if it's a holiday title for 2021, then you don't really have to talk about it until maybe an early 2021 direct. But the point is, like, I think there's a pretty decent chance that we'll see a trailer this year, but obviously we won't know until it happens.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. So that was one question.